The earth beneath my boots whispered secrets as I trudged along the muddy trails of Gatineau Park, a chill sinking into my bones that had nothing to do with the damp October air. My heart raced, not from the steep climb, but from a gnawing unease that coiled tighter with every step. Recent torrential rains had turned the forest floor into a grotesque tapestry, dark streaks and uneven impressions bleeding through the soil, as if the ground itself bore the scars of a violent past. Each squelch of my boots sent shivers racing. Up my spine, the air crackling with murmurs, "Please, no," echoes seeping from the earth, pulling me into a shadowed realm where history and horror tangled like roots. I'm Quirino, 42, a forest ranger now, but once a historian, sifting through dusty tomes and faded archives, chasing the past like it could fill the holes life had carved into me. I traded academia for these woods in Quebec, seeking solace among the ancient trees of Gatineau, their gnarled branches witnesses to centuries of secrets. But today, those secrets weren't staying buried. The rain had stirred them up, and the forest felt alive, humming, with a weight I couldn't shake. The wind picked up, sharp and cold, carrying the scent of wet earth and something darker, a faint whiff of despair, a trace of sorrow that clung to the breeze like damp rot. I stopped dead, my breath fogging in the chill, the hairs on my neck prickling as the ground beneath me shifted, not physically, but in feel, like it had stories to tell, stories of blood and loss that refused to stay silent. I'd heard the tales whispered in Chelsea's taverns, settlers massacred long ago in these woods, their spirits bound to the land, their deaths a stain no time could wash away. As a historian, I'd dismissed them as folklore, quaint myths to spook tourists, but now, standing here, I felt them. Cries vibrating through my boots, a pull from the earth I couldn't ignore, raw and real. The soil wasn't just mud anymore, it was a canvas of anguish, dark marks twisting into shapes that looked too deliberate, handprints clawing upward, desperate for release. My stomach lurched, a shiver racing down my spine as the truth sank in. These weren't random patterns. They were echoes of a massacre, a history screaming to be heard, its voices growing louder, more commanding. Why me? The question burned in my chest, my pulse hammering as I stood there, torn between bolting back to the ranger station and digging deeper into this nightmare. I'd spent years running from my own ghosts, family lost, guilt I couldn't bury, and now the land was dragging them up, weaving my pain into its own, a reckoning I couldn't outpace. The trees loomed taller, their shadows stretching like fingers across the trail, and I felt it, a connection, a thread tying me to this place, to the souls trapped beneath it. My past as a historian had taught me to seek answers, but my life had taught me to fear them, and here I was, caught between the two, the whispers pulling me under. The air thickened, heavy with an energy that buzzed under my skin, and I couldn't shake the feeling. The forest wasn't just alive, it was awake, watching me, waiting for me to act. The pleas grew sharper. "Help us. Don't leave!" And I stumbled, my boots sinking deeper into the mud as if the ground itself wanted to hold me here. I'd always been the guy who pieced things together, dates, names, events. But this was different, a puzzle carved in sorrow, not ink. The wind howled, carrying their cries, and I felt my resolve waver, a mix of dread and duty locking me in place, pulling me toward something I couldn't yet see. The dark streaks in the moist soil glinted under my flashlight, wet and raw, like blood seeping up from a wound that wouldn't heal. My hand shook as I traced one with my boot, the impression shifting under the pressure, a hand, small, reaching, and I jerked back, my breath hitching, the forest closing in around me. I'd come to Gatineau for peace, to escape the weight of my failures, my sister's death, my parents' grief, my own silence, but now the land was mirroring it back, every step a reminder of what I'd lost. The voices swelled, a chorus of pain, and I knew this wasn't just their story. It was mine, tangled in roots I couldn't uproot. The trees creaked, their branches swaying without wind, and I felt it, a presence, vast and old, stirring beneath the surface, tugging at me like a tide. My chest tightened, fear warring with a strange pull, a need to understand, to face what I'd avoided for too long. Twilight crept in, the last light bleeding away, and the whispers turned to screams, sharp and desperate, clawing at my mind. The forest pulsed, alive with a hunger I couldn't name, and I knew night was falling, and with it, something inexplicable was waking up. The screams erupted as night swallowed the park, a cacophony of anguish that drowned out the rustle of leaves, the trees looming like silent judges over a trial I hadn't signed up for. My heart slammed against my ribs, loud enough to mute. The crickets, as I stumbled back, my boots slipping in the mud, the ground pulsing under me like it had a heartbeat of its own. I'd always prided myself on logic, dates in a ledger, facts on a page. But this defied it all, a raw, living history I couldn't rationalize away. The settlers' massacre, a footnote in my old research, was no longer just words. It was here, screaming through the soil, wrapping around me like a shroud I couldn't shake. "Carino!" Sarah's voice cut through, sharp and urgent. And I spun, my flashlight beam slashing the dark to find her jogging toward me, her face pale, her environmental scientist badge glinting faintly under her jacket. She'd joined us months ago, all bright eyes and data, but now her brow was creased, her breath fogging fast in the chill. "You shouldn't be out here alone," she said, stopping short, her eyes flicking to the trees, unease tightening her voice. I felt it, something off. The air's thick with it, like it's pressing down. Her skepticism was there, but it wavered, a crack letting the dark seep in. "Did you hear them?" I asked, my voice low, trembling as I stepped closer. "The voices, please, help us. They're coming from the ground." My hands shook, pointing at the mud, the impressions glinting wet and raw under my light, begging her to see what I saw. She frowned, her practical side kicking in, arms crossing tight. "Voices? Quirino, it's probably the wind through the trees. You've been out here too long. You need rest." Her tone was firm, but her eyes darted to the shadows, betraying the doubt creeping in. "No," I snapped, frustration boiling over, my voice echoing off the trunks. "This is real, Sarah. The land's alive, telling us something. The massacre, it's not just a story, it's here, now. We've got to figure it out." My desperation spilled out raw and jagged, a plea she couldn't miss. Her gaze softened, a flicker of understanding breaking through. "Okay, what do you want to do?" she asked, her voice quieter, her hands dropping to her sides, a step toward me in the dark, a lifeline I grabbed onto. "We dig in, find the truth," I said, my chest heaving, resolve hardening, despite the fear clawing at me. If I can understand their pain, maybe I can face mine too. My past surged up, my sister's accident, my silence, my guilt, and I felt it tie into this, a knot I couldn't untangle alone. Sarah hesitated, her eyes scanning the clearing, the shadows stretching long and thin. "If there's spirits here, we're playing with fire," she said, her voice low, steadying. "We need to be smart, careful." Her caution anchored me, a balance to my rush into the unknown. "Let's go deeper," I said, my voice firm. Turning toward a trail I'd seen in old photos, a clearing, a burial site, lost to time. My boots sank into the mud as we moved, the whispers wrapping around us, guiding us like a thread through a maze, pulling us into the heart of it. The ground grew rougher, roots snagging my feet, and I stumbled, catching myself on a gnarled trunk, its bark cold and slick under my hand. "Quirino!" Sarah's shout snapped me upright, her beam joining mine, spotlighting a row of stones jutting from the earth, worn, half-buried, a graveyard forgotten by all but the land. "This is it," I breathed, my heart racing, recognition slamming into me from years of research. The burial site, where they were left after the massacre. The air crackled, a jolt running through me, alive with the weight of history pressing down, demanding I listen. The ground trembled, a low rumble rising, and Sarah grabbed my arm, her voice sharp. "We shouldn't be here, this isn't safe." Her fear was real, her grip bruising, but I couldn't move, rooted as a vision hit. Blood, screams, faces frozen in terror, pulling me under. The vision held me, a storm of blood and chaos, settlers running, blades flashing, screams swallowed by the trees. And I gasped, my knees buckling under the weight of it, the clearing pulsing with an energy that burned through me. Sarah's grip tightened, her voice a lifeline. "Corino, snap out of it." But I was lost, drowning in their pain, my breath ragged in the cold. A figure stepped from the shadows, tall, cloaked, her face blurred but familiar, a jolt of recognition hitting me like a punch. She looked like my grandmother's stories, a woman from our line, lost to the massacre, her eyes deep with sorrow, her hand reaching out, trembling, pulling me back to a past I'd buried. "Sarah, do you see her?" I whispered, my voice shaking, pointing at the figure as she hovered at the clearing's edge, her presence a weight I couldn't shake. "She's like family, someone I've heard about, someone who lived through this." My mind reeled, tying her to me, to this land. "What?" Sarah's voice sharpened, her beam swinging wild, missing the figure as she stepped back. "You're losing it, Quirino. We need to go." Her skepticism cracked, fear bleeding through, but I saw it in her eyes, a flicker, a doubt, like she felt something too. The ground shook harder, the wind howling, and the figure's mouth moved, silent, pleading, her gaze locking on mine. Memories surged, my grandmother's voice, low and heavy, telling of a woman who'd fought to save her kids, lost them to the bloodbath, a story I'd pushed aside as distant, unreal. "She's real," I said, my voice trembling, stepping closer despite Sarah's pull. "My ancestor, her pains here, tied to me, to us." The realization sank in, cold and heavy. My family's history wasn't just in books, it was in this soil, screaming through the dark. "Corino, stop!" Sarah yanked me back, her voice breaking, her hand shaking as she held me. "This isn't safe. You don't know what you're messing with." Her fear was raw, but I felt it too, a connection, a thread linking my guilt to this place, to her. The vision deepened, her fighting, desperate, shielding her children as the world burned around her. And I saw it. My own silence mirrored back, my failure to face my sister's death, my parents' grief. "This is about me," I gasped, turning to Sarah. "Our families, it's all connected." She froze, her eyes narrowing, suspicion warring with fear. "What do you mean, our families?" she asked, her voice low, trembling, a crack in her armor letting the dark seep in, a question I couldn't fully answer yet. The figure lunged, a roar splitting the air, and the whispers turned to screams, a chaotic chorus drowning my thoughts. "They're alive!" I shouted, my voice raw, reaching for her. "They want justice. We can't ignore it." The spirits surged, their pain a tide pulling me under. Sarah's grip faltered, her voice shaking. "Justice? Corino, you're risking us both," she cried, but I saw it. A flicker in her eyes, regret, recognition, like she knew more than she'd let on, a tie to this place she couldn't hide. The ground lurched, a crack splitting the eyes. Mud, and I stumbled, my hand brushing the figures, cold, electric, a jolt that burned through me. "I'm here!" I yelled, my voice steadying, a vow to her, to them, to face what I'd run from too long. Sarah stepped beside me, her breath hitching, her resolve hardening. "If we're doing this, we do it together," she said, her voice firm. Despite the tremble, her hand finding mine, a pact sealed in the dark as the clearing pulsed, alive with their rage. The air crackled, the shadows closing in, and I felt it a choice, a line I'd crossed, tying me to this history, to her, to Sarah. "Let's end it," I said, my voice steady, facing the figure, ready to dig into the truth, whatever it cost. The figure's hand brushed mine, a shock of cold and light exploding through me, swallowing the clearing in a storm of sensations, pain, loss, love, all crashing together like waves on a jagged shore. The world faded, replaced by a blood-soaked past, my ancestors' screams, her kids' cries, the betrayal cutting deep, and I was her, living it, breaking under it. I hit the ground. Hard, my lungs burning, gasping as the light dimmed. Sarah's voice piercing through. "Quirino!" She dropped beside me, her hand shaking as she grabbed my shoulders, her face a mix of horror and awe, her breath fogging fast in the chill. The figure was gone, but the air hummed, a whisper of sorrow and peace lingering, threading through me. Like a scar, I felt them, my ancestors, their stories etched into my bones, a weight I'd carry forever, a truth I couldn't unsee, couldn't unfeel. "You okay?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling, her hand steadying me as I sat up. Mud caking my knees. Her fear was real, but there was something else, a bond forged in the dark, a shared mark we couldn't shake, tying us to this place. "I think so," I rasped, my voice rough, my mind spinning as I pieced it together. Their pain, mine, tangled in a knot I'd only begun to unravel. But it's not over, something's still here. My hand brushed my chest, a faint ache pulsing, a reminder of the dark we'd touched. A glint caught my eye, a locket, half buried in the dirt, intricate and worn. I grabbed it, my heart racing as I pried it open. A faded photo, her face, the woman from my grandmother's tales, staring back. "Sarah, look!" I held it up, my voice shaking. "It's her, she was real." Her eyes widened, a spark of wonder cutting through the fear. "What does it mean?" she whispered, her hand brushing mine as she leaned in, the locket warm. "Between us, a thread to a past we'd only scratched? It means we're tied to this," I said, my voice low, heavy with realization. "Our family's this land. It's not done with us." The locket pulsed, a call to dig deeper, a mystery stretching beyond this night, beyond the clearing. A rustle broke the silence, trees shifting, a shadow flickering at the edge, and my gut twisted, dread spiking sharp and cold. "Something's watching," I said, my voice steady despite the chill, my hand closing around the locket, a vow to face what lingered. Sarah stood, her jaw tight, her eyes fierce. "We need to regroup, figure this out," she said, her voice firm, pulling me up, her strength a rock I leaned on. "Whatever's out there, we'll face it, together." Her words sank in, a pact renewed in the fading light. I nodded, the weight settling, not lighter, but shared. "This isn't the end," I said, my voice steady, hauling my pack up, the locket warm in my pocket. "We've started something. We've got to finish it." My chest tightened, resolve locking in, a fire against the dark. The forest loomed, its shadows deep and alive, and I felt it, a pull, a call to uncover more, to face what waited. "Let's go," I said, my voice firm, stepping forward, the mud sucking at my boots, the night alive, with whispers still begging to be heard. The air shimmered, a faint hum rising, and I glanced back, the clearing empty, but not silent, a promise hanging heavy. "They're still here," I murmured, my hand brushing Sarah's, a vow to them, to us, to keep going, to find the truth. The shadows stretched, the wind whispering my name, Quirino, and I knew this was just the start, a fight we'd begun, a history we'd have to face, step by muddy step, until the earth stopped screaming. The whisper lingered. "Quirino," a chill threading through the trees as we stumbled. From the clearing, the locket burning warm in my pocket, a tether to a past that wouldn't let go. My boots sank into the mud, each step heavier, the forest watching, waiting, its shadows curling like fingers around us. Sarah walked beside me, her breath fogging fast, her grip tight on my arm. "You sure you're okay?" she asked, her voice low, her eyes flicking to the trees, worry creasing her brow. That was intense. Her concern was real, a lifeline I clung to, steadying me in the chaos. "I have to be," I said, my voice firm despite the tremble in my hands, resolve, hardening like steel. "We freed something, but not everything. There's more out there." My gaze swept the dark, catching that flicker again, a shape, a presence, lurking just beyond the light. The ground pulsed, a low hum rising through my boots, and I felt it, the forest alive, its secret stirring, whispering my name in a voice too familiar. "They're not done," I said, my voice low, heavy with realization. My ancestors, they want more than peace. They want justice. Sarah's eyes narrowed, her voice steadying. Justice? Quirina, we barely got out. What if it's too much? She asked, her hand brushing mine, a crack in her calm, letting the fear seep through. A question I couldn't fully answer. A gust whipped through, sharp and cold, and the shadows twisted, faces forming, my ancestors' eyes glinting. With rage and sorrow, a chorus swelling around us. Justice must be served, they roared, a voice from my core, and I froze. The locket pulsing hot, their strength surging through me. Let justice be done, I whispered, my voice steady, facing them, feeling their pain, their fury mingle with mine. The air crackled, the ground trembling, and I knew this wasn't just their fight. It was mine, ours, a reckoning I couldn't turn from. Sarah stepped closer, her jaw tight, her eyes fierce. If we're doing this, we do it right, she said, her voice firm despite the shake, her hand locking with mine. We'll find the truth, whatever it takes. Her resolve bolstered me, a fire against the dark closing in. The trees swayed, their whispers growing, and I felt it, a pull, a call to dig deeper, to face what lingered. We've got to know what happened, I said, my voice steady, hauling, my pack higher, the locket a weight grounding me against the storm ahead. A shadow flickered, taller, sharper, and my gut twisted, dread spiking cold and fast. It's not over, I said, my voice low, my hand brushing the locket, a vow to them, to us, to keep going, to uncover the source of this pain. Sarah's grip tightened, her voice steady. We'll face it, together, she said, her eyes glinting with a mix of fear and fight, a pact sealed in the dark. Whatever's out there, we're stronger now. Her words sank in, a warmth against the chill creeping up my spine. Thakotioa. Forest loomed, its shadows deep and alive, and I felt it. A choice, a path to break the cycle or become its tool. Let's move, I said, my voice firm, stepping forward, the mud sucking at my boots, the night alive with their cries, their need for justice driving me on. The air shimmered, a roar building, and I knew this was bigger than us, a fight stretching through time, tying our fates to theirs. We'll find it, I murmured, my hand brushing Sarah's, a vow to keep digging, to face the dark until it broke. Here's the end of my story, the one I sent in, everything that went down that night in Gatineau. Hope it hit you like it hit me, heavy with those ghosts and their screams. If it did, leave a like, subscribe if you can, comment something. Telling, this cut deep, dragging up a past I didn't know I carried. I stood frozen that morning, boots sunk into the muddy bank of the Rio Negro, staring at the fog creeping upstream through the heart of the Amazon. It slithered against the river's flow, thick and gray, defying every rule I'd learned in 37. Years of living with this wild, breathing place. My gut twisted, curiosity warring with a prickling unease as I edged closer, the damp air sticking to my skin. The trees along the water twisted at impossible angles, trunks bent and gnarled like they'd been squeezed by giant hands overnight, their bark glistening wet in the dim light. I'd seen storms snap branches, floods carve paths, but this was something else, something wrong. I'm Andre, born and raised where the black waters of the Rio Negro meet the jungle's edge. A forest ranger who knows these rhythms like my own pulse. The forest's whispers, leaves rustling, birds calling were my cradle songs, its heartbeat my guide. But these past few days, that fog's been rising, inching closer to my cabin with every dawn, heavy and alive. I tried cutting into one of those twisted trees yesterday, axe sinking deep, only to hit wood that pulsed, warm, damp, like flesh still breathing. The blade stuck, and I yanked it free, heart hammering, a chill racing down my spine. Back in São Gabriel da Cachoeira, where I grew up, The old folks spun tales over firelight. River spirits, ancient guardians who'd punish anyone fool enough to cross them. I'd laughed them off, chalking it up to superstition from a time before we had science to lean on. Now, though, those stories felt too close, pressing in with the fog, like the air itself was whispering warnings I couldn't ignore. That fog wasn't just weather, it was something more, a force with intent, pushing back at me like I'd trespassed, on sacred ground. The trees weren't victims, they were part of it, twisting tighter each day, creeping toward my cabin like a slow, angry tide. Their shapes turned menacing, branches clawing the sky, roots bulging like they'd rip free and grab me. The forest I'd sworn to protect was turning, resentment seeping from the soil. Every instinct screamed to run, to pack up and get out before whatever this was swallowed me whole. I'm no stranger to danger, poachers with guns, jaguars stalking, silent, the slow grind of loggers chewing up the edges. But this wasn't something I could fight with fists or wits. This was old, deep, a primal thing that didn't care about my badge or my duty. The days blurred into nights, the fog thickening, and the river's roar grew loud, too loud, a fury that drowned my thoughts. It wasn't just water anymore. It was a voice raging, calling me out, daring me to face whatever hid in that mist. The trees closed in, their twisted forms a cage, and I felt it, the forest itself turning on me, a living thing pissed off at the human dumb enough to think he belonged. Night dropped heavy, and the fog went dark. Blacker than the river, a nightmare I couldn't wake from. The trees hissed secrets in a language I didn't know, leaves rattling like a warning chant. I stood on my porch, heart slamming against my ribs as shadows deepened, the river's roar shaking the planks under my feet. Then I heard it. Andre, soft, sultry, drifting up from the fog. I spun, eyes raking the dark, half sure I'd imagined it. Andre, it called again, clearer, pulling me like a hook in my chest. My boots twitched forward, instinct yelling to bolt the other way, but I couldn't. Something in that voice felt like home, twisted with something alien. She stepped from the mist, Mara, the herbalist from the village, her dark hair wild, eyes sharp with old knowing. She'd warned me plenty about spirits, her voice always carrying that edge of truth I'd brushed off. You shouldn't be here, Andre, she said, urgent, stepping close. The forest's mad, the fog's its fist, it's guarding something. What? I rasped, throat dry, the river's growl loud in my ears. What did I do? My hands shook, gripping the porch rail, the fog curling around us like it was listening. You've upset the balance, she said, firm, her gaze cutting through me. Those trees, they're keepers of this place. You felt it, right? It wants you gone? Her words landed heavy, and I shook my head, doubt clawing up. I protect this forest. I can't just leave. I need to know what's happening. Her eyes softened, hand brushing my arm, warm against the chill. It's not just you, it's the village too. The fog's a warning. Spirits are waking up, and if we don't fix this, they'll hit back hard. Her voice steadied me, but dread sank deeper. Those old tales of lost villagers swallowed by the mist, flashing in my head. What do we do? I asked, the weight shifting, pulling her into this mess with me. A ritual, she said, urgency sharpening her tone. Sacred. Herbs, a call to calm them down, but we both have to do it together. The idea twisted my gut. What if it went wrong? But I nodded, resolve hardening. If it fails, we're not facing it alone. Promise me that. She met my eyes, fierce. Together, we'll take on whatever's out there, but we've got to move. The fog's restless. The river howled, the mist tightening, and we stepped into it, the forest watching, waiting. As we dove into a fight I wasn't sure we could win, the fog swallowed us as we pushed deeper, thick and heavy, pressing against my chest like a wet hand. Each step dragged, the ground fighting back, roots snagging my boots. Mara moved ahead sure-footed, but I felt eyes, too many, tracking us from the dark. The trees loomed, their twisted shapes clawing the sky, whispering louder, sharper, digging into my fears. What if this is my fault? I blurted, voice shaking, the thought spilling out raw. I came here to guard this place. Maybe I've wrecked it instead. My breath hitched, the fog stinging my lungs, guilt I'd carried for years bubbling up. Mara stopped, turning, her face tight. Don't do that to yourself, Andre. The forest digs up what's buried. It's not just you. Your past's tangled in this. Her words hit hard, pulling up my dad, his laugh, his stories. The night he vanished into these woods when I was a kid, leaving me with nothing but questions and an ache that never quit. That summer flashed back, him teaching me to fish, the river's hum, then the silence after he didn't come home. I'd come back here as a ranger, thinking I could fix it, protect what he'd loved. Now I wondered, had I stirred something up, something tied to him? The fog pulsed, alive, and I felt it. His ghost, maybe, woven into this mess. A scream cut through, high, sharp, bouncing off the trees. My heart jumped, eyes locking with Mara's, wide and spooked. What the hell was that? I choked out, hand twitching to my knife, the fog swirling mean around us. No idea, she said, tense, but we've got to keep going. Her voice shook, but she moved, and I followed, the whispers turning loud. My dad's voice in there, twisted, begging. My head spun, panic clawing up my throat. Mara, I hear him. My dad, I gasped, grabbing my skull as the past flooded in. Focus, Andre, she snapped, grabbing me. It's the spirits. They're talking about him, about this place. Her grip steadied me, but the ground shook and light exploded from the river. Bright, blinding. I threw an arm up, squinting, as a woman stepped out, glowing, her face old and haunting like she'd been here forever. You're back, she said, voice heavy, rolling through the mist, her eyes pinning me. But you've woken something. I can't hold, she was no ghost. This was a guardian, real and terrifying, and I felt my knees buckle. What's out there? I croaked, dread pooling cold in my gut. The dark that took your father, she said, staring through me. It's after you now. My breath stopped, truth slamming in. The forest wasn't just home. It was a cage for something angry, something I'd set loose. My dad's loss wasn't random. It was tied here, and I'd walked right back into it. The fog tightened, the river roaring like it'd swallow us, and I whispered, Mara, we've got to do this, now. Time was slipping, my dad's fate dangling in front of me, and I knew, whatever waited in that mist, I'd face it for him, for this place, even if it broke me. She stood there, that guardian, her glow cutting through the fog, her eyes burning with a grief older than the trees. Choose, Andre, she said, voice echoing deep. Take the dark or fight it. Truth's gonna hurt either way. Her words hung heavy, daring me to pick, and I felt my dad's laugh, bright, then gone, light. A fire in my chest. I won't let it have me, I said, voice steadying, stepping up. I need to know what happened to him. My hands clenched, nails biting my palms, years of running from that pain turning into something hard, something I could use. Mara edged closer, worry creasing her face. Andre, if we dig this up, we might not control what comes out. The forest's pissed. It won't let go easy. Her voice trembled, but I shook my head, the whispers, his whispers, drowning her out. I don't care. I've got to face it. I yelled, the need bursting free. The fog spun wild, and the guardian's face twisted. My dad's now, warped and mad. Truth, huh? She roared, deep and furious. Let's see if you're worth it. Her hand shot out, the ground splitting, wide. A black swirl sucking at me, hungry and loud with trapped screams. Dark pulled hard, a cold grip promising to eat me alive, and I saw them. Shadows down there, twisting, my dad's voice calling out. Mara grabbed me. No, Andre, it's a trick. But I shook her off, fierce. I can't leave him again. I stepped closer, the void tugging, his pleas sharp in my ears. I'm going in, I said, firm, the dark begging me forward. Mara's eyes went wide. What if it's lying, using him? But the guardian cut in, choose now. And I felt it, the moment snapping tight, my whole life balanced on this edge. I'm fighting, I roared, diving in, the dark swallowing me fast. I fell, air burning out of my lungs, shadows clawing, my dad's face flashing, happy then broken, pushing me to keep going, to not give up. I hit ground, solid cold. The dark a thick mist now, swirling in a huge hollow space. Shadows danced on the walls, voices crying, trapped, and I stood shaking, fists tight, blood dripping from where I'd gripped too hard. I wasn't letting this win. A mirror loomed, old, cracked, glowing black, and I stepped up, shadows shaping. Into him, Dad hurting, calling, "Andre, help!" My chest tore open, grief and rage spilling out. "What happened?" I shouted, voice cracking, the mirror showing it. Betrayal, pain, him alone against this thing. I reached out and it hit me, energy blasting back, knocking me flat. His voice mixed with screams, loud and awful, but I got up, feeling her power, the guardians still in me. I could fight this for him, for them all, and I pushed love, good times, all I had, into that mirror, light cracking through. Shadows screamed, breaking apart, light flooding the space, and I felt it. Release, freedom. But the mirror pulsed, dark still alive in it. Corridors stretched out, endless, secrets waiting, and I knew this wasn't the end. Mara was there at the edge, pale, scared. "You did it, but what's it cost?" she asked, voice shaking. My hands glowed faint, cut and bruised, power humming under the hurt. "What now?" I whispered, dread sinking in. The shadows weren't gone, just quiet. "We've gotta go," she said, searching my face. "But that power, if you can use it, we might find the source. There's more, your dad, this place, us." Her words hung, and I looked back, the mirror flickering, showing something bigger, darker, waiting. I took a breath, stepping toward her, but the air shifted, heavy, mean. The corridors called, truth pulling me, and I moved, Mara shouting, "Andre, wait!" But I couldn't stop. Shadows surged, wrapping tight, and I felt it, me turning into them, part of the dark I'd fought, lost in my own fight. That's my story, what I faced in the Amazon's heart. Hope it hits you some way. If it does, give it a like, subscribe, maybe drop a word. Took a lot to spill this, cuts deep, dragging it all up, but it's out there now, and I'm glad you stuck with it. What if the stars themselves were a warning? I stood beneath the vast sky of Torres del Paine, my heart sinking as the constellations I'd charted for years twisted into a spiraling nightmare, pulsing with an alien beat. I'm Erico Salazar, a 38-year-old park ranger and stargazer, and this is my story, Scary Horror Stories, Park Ranger Edition. The night was crystal clear, yet a cold dread wrapped around me, whispering that something cosmic was unraveling. From my cabin near Lago Pejoa, I'd spent countless nights tracing the Milky Way, its glow a comfort, amidst the wild peaks and pine-scented air. The stars had been my refuge, a map I knew by heart, guiding me through the rugged beauty of southern Chile. But lately, that refuge had soured, an unease creeping into my rituals, a feeling that the heavens weren't just lights anymore, but watchers guarding a secret I wasn't meant to see. That night, squinting into the brilliance, I felt a tug, dark and insistent, pulling me closer to the edge of understanding. Dawn broke with a silence that stifled even the birdsong. I stepped outside, and my breath snagged. The ground, once firm beneath my boots, sprouted roots in eerie shapes, circles, triangles, mirroring the sky's warped patterns alive with a faint pulse. I stumbled back, heart pounding. The earth had become a canvas, scrawled with a message I couldn't read. My childhood flooded back, nights with my grandfather, his voice weaving tales of the stars, a universe vast and kind, now tainted by this creeping horror. I grabbed my camera, hands shaking, desperate to capture it, but every shot twisted, warped into grotesque mockeries, as if something fought to stay hidden. The stars, the roots, they mocked me, defying every tool I'd trusted. Days bled into nights, the patterns spreading through the forest like veins, calling me deeper. My colleagues' worried looks cut through me. I'd been their steady ranger, guardian of this land, but now I was adrift, lost in a chaos I couldn't name. Whispers reached me, legends of an ancient entity, a cosmic force threading through the roots, choosing me as its voice or its prey. Its presence brushed my mind, a pull I couldn't shake, vast and unknowable. I wasn't just a bystander, I was part of this, a pawn or a player in a game I didn't understand. Logic, my anchor, frayed as the dread grew, a shadow I couldn't outrun, but I wouldn't bow to it. I'd unravel this dark weave, face whatever lurked beneath the stars. My resolve hardened, a flicker of defiance against the fear choking me. The forest pulsed around me, alive with intent. The roots glowed faintly, their rhythm syncing with my breath, urging me on. I felt watched, not just by the sky, but by the earth itself, waiting for my move. Each step sank heavier into the dirt, a descent I couldn't stop. The air thickened, electric with something ancient, something waking, and I knew I was crossing a line. Night fell again, heavier this time. The dread sharpened, and I braced myself. Whatever this was, it was rising, and I was about to meet it head-on, whether I was ready or not. The air grew dense, oppressive. I stood alone, the stars spiraling above, their warning louder now, a cosmic drumbeat shaking my bones. Days melted. Into a haze, my obsession swelling like the roots twisting around me. I'd always leaned on reason, mapping the world with logic. But this defied it all. The warped photos, the pulsing earth, the whispers in the wind, they clawed at my sanity. Then, Rosa came, new to the ranger team, her sharp eyes cutting through the wild with a quiet strength I'd noticed but never truly known. That night, in my cabin, I spilled it all, the stars, the roots, the dread, and saw a spark in her gaze, a recognition that chilled me. "You're not alone," she said, voice low, urgent. "I've seen it, lights flickering, animals spooked. Something's unraveling here, Eriko." Her words hit hard, a lifeline and a weight all at once. I'd thought this was mine to bear, but her shared fear shifted everything. Comfort twisted with new terror. Rosa's ecological lens met my cosmic one, weaving a thread between the land's chaos and the sky's warning. We pored over maps, her notes on wildlife clashing with my star charts. Patterns emerged, a story stitching together, dark and vast. The roots weren't random. They mirrored the sky, a bridge between earth and stars. One night, hunched over papers, I felt it, a pull, sharp and undeniable, yanking me toward the forest. I stood, papers scattering, my pulse racing, as if the roots themselves called my name. "Eriko, where are you going?" Rosa's voice sliced through, tense with worry. She grabbed her jacket, eyes wide, but I barely heard her over the thudding in my chest. "It's calling," I rasped, trembling. "I have to see." The need overwhelmed me, a tide I couldn't fight, drowning reason in its wake. "Don't be stupid," she snapped, stepping closer. "You don't know what's out there. We don't." Her fear was raw, but I couldn't stop, not now. "I can't ignore it," I said, desperation cracking my voice. "I need answers." My eyes pleaded and she relented, jaw tight. "Then I'm with you," she said, resolute. "We do this together." Her strength bolstered mine, a pact forged in the dim light of my cabin. Into the forest we went, the air buzzed, roots glowing. Under moonlight, their rhythm hypnotic. The trees loomed, shadows stretching, alive with a presence I couldn't name. A rustle snapped us back, something moved, and we stumbled, hearts in our throats. A figure emerged, cloaked in dark, eyes glinting like stars, and dread crashed over us. "Me? Who dares disturb the awakening?" it boomed, voice ancient, shaking the earth. I froze, Rosa beside me as the game shifted, pulling us into its depths. The figure towered, shadows weaving around it like a shroud. My breath hitched, fear warring with a need to stand my ground. Rosa's eyes burned, fierce despite the terror tightening her grip on my arm. "Who are you?" I choked out, voice quaking but defiant, needing something to anchor me in this storm. "A guardian," it said, voice rolling like thunder across the peaks. "But you, Eriko, are more. Your roots dig deep, tied to this land, your past a thread, in its weave." My name on its lips iced my blood. How did it know me? Memories flickered, my bond to this place, once a comfort, now a chain linking me to this moment. "Your pain festers," it went on, eyes shimmering, alive. "Buried, it calls to me, the land feels it, as do I." Its words dug into me, unearthing what I'd hidden. My mother's death surged up, a wound I'd sealed shut, her absence a shadow I'd outrun with stars and duty. Had I been wrong to bury it, letting it rot beneath my calm? "What's that? Mean?" I whispered, dread pooling. "What's my pain got to do with this?" My voice barely held, fragile against the weight. It stepped closer, air crackling. "You're not alone in it. Rosa carries her own." The words shifted my gaze. To her, confusion spiking. "What's it talking about?" I asked, turning. Her face tightened, shadows of her own surfacing, a story I hadn't seen. "My brother," she said, voice soft, breaking. "Lost him years ago, an accident. I thought I'd moved on, but..." Her eyes glistened, pain raw, and shared. Our grief linked us, a thread I hadn't known tied us to this place, to it. The figure watched, silent, as the ground pulsed, alive with our pasts. "Embrace it together," it said, melodic, haunting. "Your pain's your strength, face it, and the truth opens." The forest trembled, reality bending around us. I met. Rosa's gaze, fear, yes, but a spark too. This wasn't just the land's mystery, it was ours, scars and all, pulling us deeper. The air hummed, urging us on. I knew logic wouldn't save me now. It was time to face the dark within, with Rosa beside me, into whatever waited. The ground shook harder, roots coiling tighter. I braced myself, Rosa's touch steadying me as the figure loomed, its form sharpening in the moonlight. "Embrace it," it had said. My chest tightened, grief a stone I'd carried too long. "How?" I muttered, voice lost in the wind. But Rosa heard. "Together," she said, hand on mine, firm. "We let it out, face it." Her resolve cut through my fog, a lifeline I clung to. The figure nodded, shadows writhing. "Your memories unlock you." The trees swayed, branches clawing the sky, air thick with tension. "Eriko, focus!" Rosa urged, voice sharp. I shut, my eyes diving into the pain. My mother's smile flashed, her laughter, then the silence after, a void that swallowed me. I saw her grave, the dirt on my hands, the ache I'd buried. I let it rise, a scream tearing free, raw and jagged, echoing. Through the trees, Rosa's cry joined mine, her brother's ghost in her voice. Our pain merged, a storm breaking loose, shaking the earth beneath us. The figure loomed closer. "You're stronger together." Light flared from our grief, blinding, pushing back the dark. I grabbed Rosa's hand, our scars a bridge, shadows twisted, memories spilling out. My mother, Rosa's brother, alive in flickers. The air crackled, power surging as the ground steadied. Then a figure stepped from the trees, Marco, my lost friend, face etched with regret. "Eriko, I'm sorry. I ran that day," he said, voice breaking, shock. "Hit me. Marco, gone since my mother's death, here now?" "Why?" I rasped, grief and guilt colliding as he stood before us. "I couldn't face it," he said, eyes wet. "But I'm here now. For you." His words stitched a wound I hadn't known, still bled. The forest pulsed. Alive with our pasts, this wasn't just us. It was all of us, tied by loss, facing it now. The figure watched, silent, as energy swelled. "Together," Rosa said again, voice steady. I nodded, Marco joining us, our hands linked. The dark loomed, but we'd meet it, forged anew in this crucible of pain. Light burst around us as we stepped into the chaos. Time froze, the forest, holding its breath. Shadows screamed, a tempest of our pasts clawing at us. It faded. I hit my knees, gasping, the earth cool beneath me. Rosa knelt beside me, ragged but unbroken. Marco slumped against a tree, stunned. We did it, I breathed. But the weight lingered, scars deep, not gone. Rosa's eyes held strength, yet doubt flickered, her own battles still raw. "You okay?" I asked, wiping dirt and tears from my face. She nodded firm. "We'll get there," she said, voice laced with something unresolved. Marco spoke, shaky. "I thought I'd lost you both back then." His guilt hung heavy, a bridge rebuilt but fragile. Years of silence between us. "There's more to say," I replied, heart aching. "Not just for me, but for us, the gaps we'd yet to mend." The forest hummed, charged, alive still, a glint caught. My eye, a silver pendant, half buried by roots. I dug it free, its design strange yet familiar, a whisper of something old. "What's that?" Rosa asked, leaning in. Marco's brow furrowed. "A crest, maybe," he said. "Yours, Errico. It's tied to you." The air shifted, energy pulsing. The pendant felt alive, a key to our pasts. Shadows danced, teasing secrets we weren't ready for. "It's ours," I said, pocketing it. "Our history, tangled here, waiting." The forest watched, its mystery deepening, a thread unwoven. Rosa's hand found mine. Marco's beside us. We'd faced grief. But this was bigger. A door, cracked open to more. The stars above spiraled still, warning unchanged. I felt hope flicker, faint but real. We weren't just survivors, we were seekers now. Whatever waited, we'd chase it, scars and all, together into the dark ahead. The pendant burned in my pocket as we moved deeper, the forest warped, shadows thickening, whispering louder, a chorus of our buried fears. The ground quaked, reality twisting. My mother's laugh turned to screams, Marco's guilt a choking mist, Rosa's resolve fraying as her brother's ghost loomed. "Errico," Rosa cried, voice breaking, "what have we done?" Her fear mirrored mine, the dark surging, alive with our pasts. I saw it then, a silhouette, my terror made flesh, eyes hollow. It gripped my heart, cold and unyielding. I was slipping, control fading. "Run!" I yelled, but the path shrank, trapping us. The shadows weren't just memories. They were us, consuming us whole. Despair swallowed me, my mother, Marco, Rosa, all lost to the dark I'd unleashed. I felt myself unravel, essence torn as the figures closed in. Silence fell. I was alone, trapped in a nightmare I'd forged. The stars' warning fulfilled. I'd sought truth but became the dark instead, forever bound. That's my tale carved out. I hope it gripped you. If it did, hit like, subscribe. Maybe toss a thought below. It's raw, spilling this, so I'd love to know it stuck with you.